All right, so we're here outside the Provo Library, and we spent all day from 9 to 5 at the annual gathering of the Mormon Transhumanist Association. And one of the reasons that we came from such a distance is among the keynote speakers was Tamika Tillman, who is a member of the LDS Church and very high-level former State Department under Hillary Clinton, former high-level individual policy expert with
super creepy dude.
With New America, he set up the Bretton Woods social impact investing and was very key in digital identity, and is now at Andreessen Horowitz. So the fact that someone of that prominence would be keynoting at a convention like this, I think says to me, also the theme of the conference was decentralizing power. So most of the discussions today had to do with some aspect of blockchain or digital identity, and within the context of faith oftentimes. And so we thought it was important to come out. So Drew here is going to give a little bit of background.
Just a little bit of background on our meeting space here. It is the original Brigham Young Academy before we had Brigham Young University. I lived here in this area in the early 90s, and it was vacant for a large part of that time, and I had personal aspirations of, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could get this building, and there was some talk of tearing it down at one point. We were all very happy that it was restored and is now a library. So that was great, but it was sort of the forerunner to Brigham Young University. I will say that as far as the conference, that mostly they covered all the glorious and good things that they thought could come out of blockchain, and I personally confronted the Cato Institute libertarian guy, and he seemed to have more good to say than bad about who would decide what constituted a crime or not, and I found that very problematic.
And he was talking about ULEX, which was
yes,
sort of like open source law.
Open source law, right?
For charter cities.
So the charter cities, they would enforce this, but they would not actually be building their policy, and I find that problematic.
And so we started out the morning, and I would say they thought they were going to have about 180 people. I'm not sure, but it was a pretty full room. People from all over the place. There was one of the speakers was from Lisbon in the background, and someone else came from France. So it had some international component to it.
Mostly men, I would say.
Switzerland.
Predominantly men.
Oh,
predominantly men that were there, and not a real diverse group of people. But I would say not all Mormon though, right? Like us. I mean, there were people from all over that wanted to know more about it. When you asked Tamika Tillman, you asked him a question. Do you remember what the question was that you asked him?
I was asking about the ethics of faith-based institutions investing in social impact finance, knowing that they were going to put children in vulnerable communities on blockchain. Mm-hmm. And he kind of dithered around a little bit, and he's like, I don't know about the churches, but these big capital funds, yes. And it's because he works for Andreessen Horowitz that's going to be doing the investing.
Well, when they were giving his bio, they talked about the fact that he was a speechwriter for Hillary Clinton. They talked about his connections to the World Economic Forum. And although I don't get caught in the whole big bad Klaus Schwab WEF, it is a problem, but I did address the whole idea of you will own nothing and be happy. He had never heard that before, and I looked at the room and I said, y'all know what I'm talking about? And they were like, and the whole room was like, yes, we know what you're talking about. I said, it's kind of the elephant in the room, because I was asking about digital identity, blockchain identity, and how it relates to the pandemic, because he said war, he mentioned war, and he mentioned the pandemic, and that's of course the crisis that is necessary to impose the next thing, whatever it is that they want to bring in next. And I do believe that they will use, and they are using, the pandemic for that biosecurity state that you helped me understand.
Yeah, and I would say initially in his talk, he framed it out saying that he was going to talk about Ukraine, although he didn't talk about Ukraine as much as I thought he was going to talk about Ukraine. But it's interesting that he made that point, because clearly what's advancing Ukraine, and Zelensky there has developed this your government on a smartphone. He was doing that in 2019. So when we look at all of what is happening and what is unfolding, in many respects it is teeing up this next phase of digital governance, and also the fact that refugees are a major social impact market opportunity. So both of those things, it's advancing the crypto, it's advancing digital government, and it's advancing dispossession, not the people are caught in the middle and of these larger financial markets. So I would say my frustration was that for the most part, they all wanted to operate as if there was some digital utopia out there, some sort of like commune where we're all going to have collectives and all do token voting and it was going to be wonderful. Right. And no one was talking about a mixed reality having a military component of surveillance. Nobody was really talking about the human capital bond markets. And then some people would say, well, some people might want to do bad things. And I would say, well, the Impact Management Project is 2,000 of the world's largest asset holders, in alignment with the governments on these public-private partnerships. So, there's not a lot that's going to go well with that. The power dynamic is too disparate.
Well, and there were some things that hit me personally because in Dallas, what I'm dealing with or what I'm exposing is the whole blockchain agenda at the community college level, our local community college, and it's Dallas College. And I am running for a seat on the board, and that's in May. It's coming up. But the guy that was talking, his name was Dr. Ben Blair. He was talking about the strangleholds of school and the path to decentralized education. And so he even admitted himself that the school where he works is still centralized. It's not decentralized, even though he's trying to push this decentralized future. But I went up to him and I talked to him afterwards and I said, okay, so they're doing that in Dallas and it's not decentralized because the centralization of power that he was saying was such a problem. That's exactly what they did with the blockchain deal for students to be put on blockchain digital wallets, digital transcripts, their mental health data, their vaccine history that will all be on there. And that's a captive market of public school students and the Dallas College District students. So he agreed with me and I said, what do you have to say to that? He didn't really have an argument with it. And so that's what's being pitched as, that's why people are buying into it. But in reality, they're not there yet. It's still a free market kind of system, but that would be fine if they were the checks and balances. They're not. These are no bid deals that are sole source, and they get to steer the contracts with whoever they want to do, and they hold the keys to the kingdom.
I just wanted to mention one of the other speakers I thought was interesting. His name is Dr. Scott Stornetta. Yeah. And so he was really excited because he essentially helped do the first cryptography, the first permanent records on a blockchain system, which it's been eclipsed. Like, he is not really well known in that regard. And he was doing that work in New Jersey, in Morristown, New Jersey at Bell Labs. And so he was happy to have an audience that was affiliated with the LDS Church to be able to talk about both the intersection of his faith and this idea of permanent records and the idea of having the world as a witness to whatever these transactions were on the blockchain. And so, with all of the interest in, Satoshi Nakamoto and all of these other, entities, we don't really hear about that other piece. But I think that the sourcing of Bell Labs and this individual who both has a very strong faith that is overlaid in the way he sees the world in this ledger system, I thought was really fascinating. So anybody else?
Okay, so the future of religion is an API. I did not know what an API was. And so the way that he described it is like if you're ordering an Uber, but he connected that with your faith, that you can still maintain your own culture and that you're familiar with and the people you're familiar with, but then you bring in all these pieces of religions from all over the world, and that it's that intersection there, or I guess a nexus in a way. But the way he pitched it, then a guy went up there and asked the question at the end. And he was saying, but you didn't talk about what was the word he used? Syncretism. Yeah, syncretism. And I had to ask what that was. I asked the guy who put on the conference, and he says, that's Mormon transhumanism is syncretism. I didn't know that definition, but he helped me.
What he means by that is it's the merging,
the two.
Science and religion.
science and religion together, but the guy on the stage was talking about
blending religion faiths.
Blending faiths and just taking like a piece of this, piece of that, whatever. But the way he described it, it was singular, whatever that word was.
Well, I think also in the conversion, the Christian conversion of indigenous communities, oftentimes they would blend their original faith practices with Christianity, and so that's also sometimes considered syncretic, both in Latin America and here. So let's see. I would just say, I worked the room pretty hard. We had a flap at the beginning. I think that the gentleman who was hosting had a bit of a chip on his shoulder because I blocked him, although, as everyone can attest, I block a lot of people, so it was not personal. So I think he felt very personally invested in this, that as many people are, that they're good people and they're doing the right thing. And I keep trying to say, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on with these power dynamics that has to be discussed, and I wouldn't be so frantic about it if it didn't seem like it was maybe 10 or 15 of us in the whole world trying to raise the alarm, if everyone was equally providing equal time to both sides of the scenario. And I would be a little less frantic, but at this point it's such a small group of us that I am. So eventually he warmed up to me. We had some good conversations. I shared my literature, and people just don't know. And at the end, there was some young guys that were clearly in the space, maybe college age or just post-college, and their jaws are dropping when I tell them about the Japan Moonshot Project and Singularity Net, and they know some stuff and they can see I'm making sense, but they're like, wow. And and one of them looked over and said, so where is this in the Salt Lake City region? Where is this? And I was like, well, it's a lot, right? Because a lot of it's tied with geospatial location and digital identity, which is connected with the state intelligence apparatus that's embedded here in the Wasatch Range. And BYU is a central player in the digital identity space, and it's tied to synthetic biology and nanotechnology, which is also part of the big Utah Research Center, and it's tied in with politicians like Huntsman and Romney and civic leaders like the Sorensen families, and these are embedded in the culture here. And so it's hard to say just it's just this one little spot over here, if you just dab it off, it'll be good. It's really endemic, I think, to the social system. And to me it feels like there was some banners, and their slogan was, what was it, what can you create? And it was a backdrop, but it was sort of a smart city with some Wi-Fi stuff. And clearly the planes also had stuff coming out the back, which I thought was interesting, flying over the valley, because there's a lot of that here. And so they talk about worlds upon worlds upon worlds, man making worlds, which is really being up there with God. I think that's the assertion. And
the extension of life, which they didn't really talk about that, but I do believe that's a piece of transhumanism. But they don't address that necessarily. They're looking at it through the lens of the faith, and to me it's the antithesis, but it's them playing God. It is what it comes off to me, is them playing God, and I have an issue with that, but especially when we're all enveloped in this in their plan. And then where's the informed consent on most of this stuff? There's just not. But they did talk a lot about this being the means to give everyone a voice, but if you turn that around, it's everyone being accessed. So they'll talk about everyone being able to access things and making things more equitable, but really it's about accessing everyone on the planet. Yeah.
They did say if I didn't want to be in mixed reality, they would say that's okay. But I don't know how that's going to work if we're all ruled from outer space and the satellite network. So, they're like, no, I would support your right to not do transhumanism. I'm like, okay, right? Well, that's part of the problem. People kept saying privacy, privacy, privacy. And I said, well, once we get to the world where your smart toilet operates with your front door lock, and if your specimen doesn't, show up, meet muster with the AI, sewage treatment protocol, you're just going to be locked in your house. So it doesn't matter if your data is private in a wallet. It just doesn't, the Toilet Board Council or Coalition, it's literally they're starting to do that. So, it's not to the point of linking it to your door lock or your car operation, but there's nothing to say it couldn't happen. So, lots to think about. I don't know, Drew, did you have any other thoughts? Anything closing now? We're good.
Drew.
Yeah, vote for Drew if you live in Arizona for governor. She's awesome. And we're for bodily autonomy. I mean, at this point, once we look at transhumanism and this being normalized and put out into society and tied to smart technologies, we really need to be clear about advocating that people have autonomy over their bodies and what gets put in their bodies. It's really important. So
Amen.
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 Same thing.
Amen.
Amen.